So again, in the last lecture, we were talking about how do we know what our strengths are. That strengths are sort of an extension of our talents that we have invested a lot of time in. And one of the things, again, I think is really important to sort of bridge between these two lectures is that you'll know something as a strength because it'll feel really authentic, that you'll feel this tremendous sense of energy, this sort of inner drive to develop them and to to feel this sort of energy that you're actually experiencing when you're using your strengths. And so this Lindley quote, I think, is really a great way of thinking about how do you know what some of your strengths are. Is that when you use your strengths, you feel good about yourself. You're better able to achieve things, and then when you're working on your strengths, you're really working towards fulfilling yourself at your potential. And so one of the ways that we can think about strengths is that in many ways strengths are this aspect of achieving our sort of goals in a way that's sort of truest to who we are, sort of truest to our talents. And so certain strengths that you have will allow you to meet a desired goal, maybe a goal that many people have, but in a different way. And so again, they should feel authentic, you should feel invigorated, you should feel intrinsically motivated. And again, this comes from, the humanist tradition from both Horney and Rogers, who sort of argue that we have these sort of directional tendencies that sort of guide us towards the types of behaviors that will help us realize our potential. Now, a major question that always comes up when we think about strengths is how universal strengths are. And so, this is going to be a major question to sort of look at the cross-cultural differences across positive psychology. And without a doubt, it is really important to remember that when you're trying to measure a strength, you have to understand the role that culture plays in defining what a strength is. And so, what I might think of as a particular type of strength in Western culture, someone might define, that type of strength a little bit differently in a different culture. But what's rather amazing is that Park and her colleagues have shown that strengths are really remarkably consistent in their endorsement across cultures. So they have this great study from now almost a decade ago, this huge international internet study of almost 120,000 individuals from all 50 states and from 54 different nations, and they just find that the endorsement rates of different types of strengths are really remarkably consistent across all cultures. So that even though your culture may sort of define what curiosity is slightly differently than a different culture, curiosity is a strength that is endorsed at least at a relatively similar rate across almost all cultures. While, again, there are certain types of strengths that are more endorsed, for example, interpersonal strengths, love and kindness and social intelligence, these are strengths that we see in all different types of cultures, and they tend to be more widely endorsed than other types of strengths, like those associated with cognition, like creativity and curiosity and learning, or in really temperance, the self-regulation, humility, and sort of prudence types of strengths. So there's sort of this two positions that we want to sort of remember in strengths. One is that actually the strengths that have been examined are those types of strengths that we see endorsed at a relatively similar rate across many different types of cultures. But you want to be careful when you're trying to measure different types of cultures, because you don't want to set up a deficit model. You don't want certain types of groups to look like that they might possess a strength while other groups don't possess a strength, or that there might be critical information about how strengths are being defined or sort of understood. And you want to be really culturally relevant in the way that you're asking questions about the strengths. And when you do that, and much like Park and her colleagues did, that's when you will find that strengths are relatively universal. There have been basically three major ways that strengths have been measured across, again, these different types of areas. So there's the sort of Clifton Strengths Finder, which is, again, used by Gallup. What we see mostly in positive psychology, the Values in Action Survey, or what will be called the VIA. And then the Search Institutes, which is really focused on more children and adolescents, looking at different types of assets that will help children essentially become the most experience the best kind of outcomes possible. So we'll start with the Strength Finders here. What we'll mostly see in the Strength Finders is that they are, again, these sort of natural capacities or talents which have ultimately been refined with knowledge and time and skill, and they're going to be focused on the types of talents or skills that will bring out the best in people in the workplace. So what I find really interesting about this type of measure is that the way that Don Clifton actually went about looking at the different types of talents is that he actually did this empirically based semi-structured interview where he looked at different types of talents that people had that predicted success in the workplace and in academics. But to find strengths, he actually looked at outstanding performers. Again, this sort of idea in positive psychology that if you want to know about excellence, you have to see people performing in an excellent way. So he looked at outstanding performers in both the academic and sort of career settings. And that's how he ultimately found those individuals or those strengths that individuals possessed that provided success in both work and academics. Again, the VIA is really the sort of hallmark classification system. There's a couple of online videos that you can also watch about these, bringing together again these 24 strengths that are sort of organized under these 6 broad different types of virtues that again have been endorsed at relatively the same rate across all different types of cultures. So if you wanted to understand how to learn about your strengths, the VIA is sort of a nice way to think about it. There's these numerous different types of questions, and you read different types of statements about a specific type of strength, and you just basically say on a scale of essentially 1 to 5, if you think that the scale or if you think that the strength is very much like you, or if it's not very much like you. And those strengths that are your signature strengths are those which are the ones that you essentially say are most likely to be like you. And fulfilling these types of strengths will be linked with this sort of idea of sense of self and identity and authentic expression. And this is why strengths are so important, because ultimately they show you that when you are fulfilling your sort of sense of self, when you're being the most true to who you are, that's the way that you'll experience the most well-being in your life. What we find again is that strengths of the heart have really been consistently linked with happiness most strongly. Whereas, by the way, it's important to remember that strengths of the mind, they're not necessarily not correlated with well-being, but they tend to be more weakly correlated with well-being. So not all strengths lead to well-being to the same degree. Some lead to stronger links with well-being and life satisfaction. One of the reasons I really like the Search Institute's development of assets is that they thought about, in developing this, the types of assets that will protect children from sort of different types of problems. So they really wanted to look at personality strengths that would decrease the risk of all kinds of difficulties. And what they really focus in on are these sort of external types of assets, these types of interactions with people and institutions that will ultimately lead to success for children. And they compare those with these types of internal assets, these personal characteristics and behaviors that children can possess that ultimately will allow them, again, to avoid today's problems. So I like this because you can actually look at these different, and the book talks a lot about this, these different types of areas, and ultimately the types of different types of assets that children can have. I want to quickly here just talk a bit about Wood et al. In 2011. You can read it online. And what they basically note that's really important is that most research had no distinction between possessing and using a strength, And what they find is that using a strength is strongly related with well-being.